Good afternoon. Welcome to the American College Financial Services Alumni Association Cocktails and Conversations webcast. My name is Steve Prew. I'll be serving as the event host and moderator this afternoon. For those of you that don't know me, I am a Vice President of Business Development for the American College. I work very closely with the independent broker-dealers, bank wires, and RIA community throughout the industry. This afternoon, I am looking forward to getting to know one of my colleagues, Mr. Ted Diggs, a bit more, as Ted will be presenting today's webcast, 7 Axioms for Leaders. Ted is the Executive Director of the American College's Penn Mutual Center for Veterans Affairs and a retired U.S. Navy captain, which we will forgive him for, as I am an enlisted veteran of the United States Navy. So thank you for letting me join you today, Ted.
Steve, thanks for joining me and allowing me to share this. I'm really looking forward to spending some time with you and the rest of the group.
Absolutely. Before we get into the presentation today, I want to make sure that we mention and highlight some of the wonderful sponsors that help make this event possible.
Absolutely. We want a special shout out to One America for allowing this to happen, and of course the American College Alumni Association, as well as the incredible team that we've got at the college. This could not be put on without a superb team, and so I thank them.
Outstanding. Thank you again to the incredible sponsors for helping support our initiatives in support of the lifelong learning here at the college. As a reminder, this session is eligible for 1 credit of CE towards the American College's professional recertification program, which attendees can self-report via the American College student portal after the webcast has ended. So speaking of the Veterans Center, Ted, I understand things have been pretty busy and there's a lot of exciting things happening these days.
There is. We are right in the middle of a fundraising campaign called Campaign Gratitude. Now, typically we have an annual fundraising event called the Clan Bacon the Soldier Citizen Award, and it happens in September. But of course, with COVID, we couldn't have it this year. So instead, we're doing a 10-week campaign starting on 9/11, and it's going through 10 weeks, and we're ending appropriately on Veterans Day. And each week we release a video. It was one that was just released yesterday, and it features our scholarship recipients that are veterans, active duty, or spouses, and showing their gratitude through, no kidding, written thank you notes to our donors. And so we go back and forth with in about a 3-minute video each week, talking about how grateful they are for the opportunity to get their education.
Outstanding. Outstanding. When does that run through, Ted?
It runs through Veterans Day on November 11th, and we've got a few weeks left. Our goal is to raise $700,000. We're gonna award somewhere north of 200 scholarships this year, and we've raised just under 600,000 right now. So we're closing in on our goal. I feel pretty confident we're going to make it and of course, if anyone in this group wants to donate, we'd be more than happy to accept that, right? And you can see on the screen there where to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the links are probably up there on the website as you speak, with the givecampus.com link right next to the alumni americancollege.edu. So feel free to click there if you decide that you want to participate in the campaign gratitude. And that's outstanding. We appreciate all of that. And why don't you go ahead, Ted, and kick us off with the information that you wanted to share today.
Yeah, sure. Well, and let me talk about one other initiative that we've got going. It's worth mentioning, and the college has announced has kicked off something called the Alumni and Friends Network, and it allows different communities of interest to come together and work together, whether it's through study or through issues that are of interest of that community. So we have launched a veterans community of interest in Alumni and Friends Network, and we've got a couple hundred that have already signed up. And so this is something brand new, and we're looking to do some research within this group. We're looking to perhaps even help with their future placement and employment, things like that. So I wanted to mention that as well, because that's something new and emerging within the college.
Perfect. Sounds like a lot to celebrate. And obviously then to remain in line with the cocktails and conversations, I think it would make sense that we toast with your signature cocktail here today, Ted. Which one is that?
Well, I'll tell you, some people can relate to this. Life is complicated enough that when it comes to cocktail hour for me, I just want something simple, something quality, something effective. So I just have a simple bourbon, and my bourbon of choice is Maker's Mark on the rocks. And that's, again, simple, effective, and quality. So, Steve, cheers.
I appreciate effective. That's, I think, the key word in the whole thing. So cheers, and thank you to everybody for joining us this afternoon.
Absolutely.
So why don't we go ahead and kick it off with the actual presentation then, Ted, if you want to dive in and share with us and everyone on the call the 7 axioms for leaders.
Sure. So let's kick this off a little bit, Steve. And first of all, leadership. Can you have too much leadership? You think every organization probably needs a little more, can always use some leadership. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And I don't want to say that I have cracked the code on all the leadership, but what I will say is that through my 27-year active duty career, I've been blessed to have been associated with and observed some superb leaders. And I've been able to find myself in a lot of different leadership situations that I could learn from. So what I've done is I have accumulated just nuggets of leadership wisdom over my years. And when I became a senior officer, I would share these axioms with whatever organization that I was leading, and it was a way to kind of go through a learning curve much more quicker with the staff. And so, just as a background, let's talk about what are we talking about these axioms. Well, when we were making decisions, we make a lot of complicated decisions in our life, in our organizations, and research has shown that our brain operates in 2 different gears. And this comes from Daniel Kahneman in his book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And System 1 and System 2. System 1 is where you make quick decisions. That's where we like to live. That's where, based on our experience, our knowledge, we can make quick decisions. System 2 is for more complex decisions. We have to slow down a little bit. And so we like to live in System 1 as much as possible. Sometimes when we can migrate from 2 to 1, we do it by using shortcuts. We do rules of thumb. Kahneman and his partner, Amos Tversky, they called it heuristics in behavioral science. Well, this is a derivative of that. It's called axiom, which is general truths that I've discovered. And once I haven't discovered, it's just general truths in general. And then, and so if we can talk about those general truths, perhaps we can make better decisions, and we can succeed in an organization, or quite frankly, in our lives a little bit better. So that's a little background on that. So here are the axioms. There's 7 axioms, and I'm looking forward to walking through each one of them. And I'm hoping that these nuggets of wisdom that I've accumulated over the 3 decades of experience that I've had will be some value to you. So let's get started. All right, the first one is most problems are communication problems. And Steve, these axioms aren't necessarily in any particular priority order, but this one is definitely the most important. This one, it's amazing how often we have a problem in our organization or our life, whatever. And if you really peel back the onion, it goes back to poor communication somewhere. I'm sure you've experienced that kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In business and in personal life, really. I mean, if you look back on it, it's a lack of communication many times that and end us getting into a pickle regardless. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so whether it's with your clients, those you love, your subordinates, your clients. So to illustrate what we can do about that, Steve, are you a college football fan?
I am a fan. Unfortunately, that's as far as I go, being 5'7" and not very athletic, but I do like to watch it for sure.
Well, I'm going to use a football example. I had the honor of privilege of playing football for the Naval Academy, and one of the interesting things about playing football at Navy is because of the military requirements and the academic rigor, it's typically the top athletes don't go there, and so the way they were able to compete is they use an unusual offense, and it's something that requires exacting coordination. It requires teamwork. It requires tremendous amount of discipline. It's called the triple option. And the reason why most teams, other teams, don't use this is because it's got a lot of moving parts to it. You've got the quarterback snapping it to the, or you've got the center snapping to the quarterback. You've got the quarterback maybe handing to the fullback. You've got the quarterback maybe pitching it out to the wide out, and then you've got maybe he's going to throw the ball. So you've got a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of, and what you find out in football is every time that there's a mesh point, we call it the mesh point, when the football is being transferred from one person to another, that's where most of the fumbles occur. And so Navy's season every year, and by the way, Armies and Air Force, they do the same thing. They have the same offense for the same reasons. Their season resides not just on the quality of the players, but perhaps more importantly on how well they can execute this complicated offense without fumbling the ball, without doing the turnovers. And so they really have to focus on those mesh points. So with that kind of background, if you think of the mesh points in football as our communication with the folks that we are dealing with, and you think about in our lives, who are our mesh points? It's our spouse, it's our kids, it's our suppliers, our customers, our bosses, our peers, parents, subordinates, all those people. And if you think about where you're fumbling the ball, it's probably in the communications with some of those. And so and once you recognize that, a lot of times you don't even think about it. You don't step back and think, where are my mesh points? And that's what I challenge the group to do is think about the mesh points and then focus on those. And if you know that you're fumbling in a certain area, maybe that's where you can improve on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that it makes me remember, Ted, back on the boat when I was in the Navy, we had sound-powered phones, and this is a long time ago, so they're probably not using sound-powered phones anymore. But somebody would have to say something. The other person would have to acknowledge exactly what they said. So if it was most problems are a communication problem, you would say most problems are communication problem I, and then it would go back to the next guy. And it would go on down the line so that nobody missed a point or any tiny detail along the way, because that's, to your point, where the fumbles would happen. But yeah, it's absolutely that resonates well.
No, that is a great example, Steve. You know, the repeat backs, and it has to be, and in the submarine force, it has to be exact. You know, word for word, exactly the repeat back. So anyways, you take deliberate steps to improve on our mesh points. All right, Steve, for Axiom 2, incentives matter, I want to maybe get a little philosophical. And when I was studying at the Navy War College, we went back and studied history. We studied the great military strategists and minds. We went to study the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, written by Thucydides. In fact, I've got Pericles sitting right here on my desk, perhaps the greatest statesman and military leader of the golden age of Athens. We studied Clausewitz, you know, the great Prussian strategist. And we also studied Sun Tzu in The Art of War. And you might wonder, why are we studying all these old folks and the way they thought when technology and warfare has advanced so much? And the answer is that although that's all changed, human nature has not. Why we go to war and expand that, why we do the things we do, has not changed. Human nature has not changed. So if you study incentives and you study behavioral, what can influence someone in their behavior, then it goes a long way. And I bring up Sun Tzu here because while Aristotle said, know thyself, Sun Tzu said, know thy enemy. And by knowing the enemy, you know what motivates them, you know how they'll act or react in certain situations. And the ultimate victory for Sun Tzu, and I love this, is if you win without ever having a conflict. Even if the other side wins, and especially if you can allow them to save face, it's a win for you. And that's really ultimately what you're trying to. So if you can actually win a battle without ever firing a shot, so to speak, then that's the ultimate victory. So anyways, and game theory, by the way, plays this out, something called tit for tat. So anyways, as you're thinking about your policies, you're thinking about your processes, what kind of behavior are they incentivizing? And also can you identify some that are incentivizing bad behavior? And sometimes that's the case unintentionally. I think of what happened a couple of years ago at Wells Fargo. I mean, these are good people that were incentivized to do some of the wrong things. So it's important as leaders to always be considering the incentives, because they really do matter. All right, let's go on to action 3. Transparency is usually the best policy. So I spent a tour in Stuttgart, Germany at US European Command as the division chief for logistics support. And one of the things that I had to do there is to interact with all the nations that we were allied with. In fact, back then it was including Russia and of course Israel and a lot of the Western Alliance, or the NATO, excuse me. And we would have to try to find out how to be interoperable from a logistics standpoint. And I say that because one of the things I found out immediately is that there's inherently a wall of mistrust, because we're from a different country, where there's a cultural difference, and there's not a lot of reason to, even though we may be allies, there's a lot of mistrust there. So I had to work really hard on how to break down that mistrust, and what I developed is what I call the daisy chain, the daisy chain to results, or the daisy chain to prosperity, because the trust doesn't come in unless you have transparency, and once you have transparency, then you can build the trust, and once you have the trust, you can build cooperation. And that cooperation encourages working together, and then working together, that's when you get the results. So that transparency, just to walk you through it, transparency builds trust, trust builds the cooperation encourages trade or working together. Some of these words are a little interchangeable. And then that working together builds the results and the prosperity. And if you find yourself somewhere stuck, sometimes it's good to look at this daisy chain and where can you move up or down to work that out. Steve, you ever been in a situation where you knew you were just stonewalled because of the lack of trust, or maybe the transparency was able to break through?
Yeah, I had the benefit of serving under 2 different skippers on board the Bellawood when I was active, and they were 2 completely different leaders. One was very process driven and almost led through intimidation. The other was very giving, very open, very transparent. To your point, built a relationship with all of the sailors on board. And one of the things, his name was Captain Brandt, and what Captain Brandt used to do was to alleviate tension on the boat, right? There were a lot of Marines. There were 2,800 Marines and 900 sailors on board our ship when we were fully underway and deployed. And with that many people on one ship, the tension can run high sometimes, especially if we're floating for a long time. Captain Brandt realized that, and there were constant fights and problems going on. He set up what were called smokers. Smokers was a boxing ring in the Akron.
Right.
And it was an organized deal that you could volunteer. You could go up and you could mix it up with the guys or whoever that you thought you had beef with. But that was outside the norm. Not everybody did that. And that was something that we all loved Captain Brandt for. And it just made us want to follow him, and the trust and the communication, the transparency. And absolutely, I mean, I've experienced both, but yeah, transparency and that trust is certainly encourages that cooperation. You're spot on with that.
Smokers, that is definitely a throwback. I remember those as well. This notion of speed of trust, though, is worth, and I want to just give another personal example. I gave the professional example, but the speed of trust. that same tour in Germany, I've got 5 kids, and I was moving over there. And one of my biggest concerns was finding adequate place to live to house this large family. And I found through a network this beautiful home that was open for rent, overlooking the town of Zindelfingen and a beautiful lake, and it was on several acres with fruit trees. It was a little bit out of my price range, but I really wanted this place. The only challenge was, how do I get them to rent this house to me that didn't know me, and I'm coming from another country and all that. So as it turns out, the owner had me send my resume of not only me, but my wife and my kids, pictures of the whole family. I had to fly over there to interview. And then after the interview, he charged me a security deposit of 9,000 euros, which was at the time was about $15,000, extraordinary amount of money, way more than I should have been. I had no business putting down that. And then I got the lease, and it was about that thick, and it was written in German. And I had to have it translated. I gave it to my JAG officer to review it. And by the time he got back to me, we had moved in, and he said, "Diggs, you're a hosed. You are hosed, because if you sneeze wrong in that house, he's got you and he can charge you." But I recognized he just didn't trust me. He just wanted, that was his insurance policy. So over the next 3 years, I built a rapport with this guy, and we got along great. I had him over for Thanksgiving. Of course, they don't, Thanksgiving is something unique for them. And we got together all the time. So in any case, I moved out. Between me and you, I was still a little nervous, but he did give us full 9,000 euros back, and the place was spotless. So it was a win-win. But I think about that, Steve, if I had a rental property and you wanted to rent it, I know you, I know your character, I trust you, right? So we could do it on one sheet of paper, or perhaps just a handshake, a look in the eye handshake. You got it. These are the terms. And think about the less stress, the less cost, the less time. So this notion of speed of trust and the value in time, effort, cost is real. So anyways, this is worth looking at. The speed of trust. Transparency is the best policy, and build trust in your organization. All right, let's do axiom number 4. Sometimes you may have to carry someone else across the goal line. So Steve, you ever been in an organization or witnessed a decision being made that was based pretty much on ego and maybe not on the best?
I've been in financial services for 25 years, so you answer that one for yourself. I would say probably so.
Well, it's not limited to financial services. We've all been there. We've all been there, and you talk about human nature not changing, right? I mean, the power or the influence of ego, you should never underestimate it, whether it's in people you work with or in yourself, talking about knowing thyself. And so recognizing that's not changing, if you can recognize that and deliberately try to build a culture of teamwork that really minimizes that challenge, because that is a challenge. And you can build a teamwork where Steve, that I've got your back, and I know that you've got my back. And if we score a touchdown, we're both going to get credit. It's not going to be Steve Prew because he's the running back and I'm the pulling guard. We're both going to get credit, and don't worry about it. And if you're stuck on the 1 yard line, I got to pick you up and carry you across. The team gets the points, because next quarter you're going to pick me up and you're going to carry me across. If you can, and that's some of that tit for tat, and that's the way you build it. Usually that tit for tat notion is thought of in a negative, like tariffs, like nations that put tariffs down. I'm going to put this tariff down, and then you up it, then you up it. It's called tit for tat in game theory. But you can use it in a positive sense as well. And if you can build that teamwork where the culture is, that the people you work with are going to carry you across the goal line when you need it, that can be a force multiplier like nobody's business. No one person gets the glory, the team gets the glory. And Steve, if you've been associated with an organization like that, man, that is something else, isn't it?
It is. It is absolutely. And that was the military way, right? On the boat, everybody had to do their part, and every little piece mattered as a collective. Right? And the ship was the ship. There wasn't any one individual on that ship. It was the USS Bellwood, and we all did our part to make sure that we achieved our mission in the end. But we all had one mission, so it was definitely a teamwork and a stakeholder dynamic there. And it happens in corporate America as well. I mean, right now here at the college, we're going through a number of initiatives that everybody has connection to and everybody has contributed to toward the end. So certainly that, and by showing that to others and doing things that go above and beyond your immediate responsibilities, you're showing that you're willing to help and to pitch in as needed. So yeah.
Likewise. So I'll close this one off by just talking a little bit about, or quoting Harry S. Truman. This is the tip of the hat to one of our colleagues, Tip Cronin, because I know he loves to quote Harry S. Truman. He says, "It's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit."
I like it.
All right. Let's move on to number 5. Know when you're having a good day. Steve, are you a goal setter? Do you write your goals down? Are you one of these, like some of us, that write your New Year's resolutions down every year, every New Year's Eve?
I have personal, professional, and otherwise goals for the year. In fact, at one point I was doing them quarterly, but yeah, annually for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I am too. I'm a big believer in goal setting. You have to set the goals. If you don't know where you're going, you don't know when you're going to be there and all that kind of thing. So when you think about your organization, do you know what the goals are of the organization? Do you know what your goals are for your, area of influence? And do you have a top 3? It's because sometimes you can have almost too many goals, can't you?
For sure. Yeah.
It can be overwhelming.
And they become confusing at a point. Yep.
It can be confusing. So I like to say, you got to know when you're having a good day, or by extension, a good week, a good month, a good quarter, and a good year. And when you're having a good week, so this comes down to metrics. What are your quantitative metrics that you're looking to build on? And you should be able to measure them, and you should be able to celebrate when you hit them, or you should be able to dive into and peeling back the onion and find out what happened when you didn't. And this really gets down to the difference between data and information. Sometimes there's metrics that are being followed that is just data. And what I mean by that is it's just information that you have no influence over. And the way to convert data into information is that information that you can actually make a management decision off of. Do you have influence over changing what that number is, or is it just, how many times did it rain, this month? Okay, it's interesting to track, but there's nothing you can do that's going to change that, right? So you ought to be tracking things that you can actually influence. And then when you hit your metric, what went right, but much more importantly, when you don't hit the metric, what went wrong? And that can be that's a great opportunity to get the team together and look at the metric, and everyone suddenly becomes a stakeholder in that metric, because everyone's got a little bit different insight of what happened and what didn't happen. When I was with the submarine force in Pearl Harbor, I worked for a superb leader. His name was Al Konechny, Admiral Konechny. Everyone called him Big Al, the sailor's pal. He was a cigar smoking, big Rodney Dangerfield looking guy, backslapping, give you big hug kind of leader. And he would always say, let's keep the main thing, which is so nonsensical, but it makes complete sense. We know what the most important thing is. Let's keep that always in the forefront, and let's not get distracted by shiny objects. How often have you been distracted or seen others distracted by the initiative of the month, or a shiny object or something, and it kind of takes your eye off the ball, and you don't and you forget about keeping the main thing the main thing. That's a great way to just bring us back on track, isn't just let's keep the main thing the main thing, right?
Mhm. Ted, I would add one thing to that, if you don't mind, and that's to kind of go back to your previous slide on the stakeholder situation. You know, many times if I find myself in a really good place and I'm hitting goal and I'm doing great and I'm developing relationships and everything's going really, really well, I tend to try to find an opportunity to reach back and grab one of my business colleagues, or touch base with somebody that I haven't in a while, that maybe they're having a great day, maybe they're not having a great day, but I find that that does two things. One, it helps develop that relationship even further from an internal stakeholder position, but then also it lets them know that you are there, good or bad, and that you know, you can kind of connect those two. And to your point there on the third bullet, the feedback loop, that all comes around as well, and helps contribute to, I think, everybody then having more good days throughout the year. So, you know, that's one of my just personal philosophies and goals, is to reach back when you're doing well. And even when you're not doing well, you know, you'll hope that somebody is kind of that tit for tat that you'd mentioned earlier, to reach back and kind of help pull you up along as well. So that's just an additional thought on that point.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like it. And you know, there's a classic book by Jim Collins. I think it was written in the 90s, called Good to Great. And in that book, and I know a lot of folks that are professionals have read it, even though it's a couple decades old. It ages. Good books age well, right? And in that book, he talked about this thing called the hedgehog concept, where, you know, you find out what you're good at, what you're passionate at, what you can be the best at, and you just stick to it, you know. And that it's like a hedgehog. You just stick to it. You don't get distracted by other shiny objects, and you end up keeping the main thing, you know. So once you figure it out, and by the way, getting good metrics is worth the effort, and it's worth the thought. You know, sometimes you'll inherit metrics. Sometimes you're starting on a new initiative where you need to develop the metrics. But reviewing those metrics are good from time to time. And you should know what they are. I mean, we all should know what they are. I will tell you, in my job as the executive director of the Veteran Center, we've got 5 metrics, and I could list them right now for you off the top of my head, and so could my staff. I mean, everybody knows what they are, and we look at them together every week. So it's never a surprise when something starts trending down, or something is trending up. We know exactly where we are, and that's good to know. It's good to know where you are. You got to know when you're having a good week. You just got to know when you're having a good week, right? Does that make sense? All right, let's move on. Let's go to Axiom 6. Understanding the process explains a lot. Now, Steve, one of the exciting aspects of my active duty career, 27 years, is that I change jobs every 2 to 3 years. So I end up moving 15 times in 27 years. And so some may think, well, what a pain in the neck, but it actually was very exciting. You're always changing jobs. You're always moving on to increased responsibility. You're meeting new people, developing new skills, and you're also always have a fresh set of eyes at an organization, which I think is incredibly valuable. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced where either you or someone new, if you've come into someone new that comes into your organization, you've been in a while, and they come in with a fresh set of eyes, I mean, they see things that you didn't even see. Have you experienced that?
Absolutely. New guy syndrome, right? You can come in and you can just kind of hover over. And in fact, I'm not even in my full final year with the college. I came last December and had that benefit of being able to just kind of sit back and watch and listen and learn, and then, you know, slowly provide thoughts and feedback and ideas that I had seen that maybe we were or weren't doing, or could be improved or changed, or whatever. But absolutely, when somebody comes in new, or you come into any situation new, you have an opportunity to see things from an outside perspective.
Yeah, and by the way, that's not to discount for 1 minute the experience and the knowledge that people that have been in an organization a while have.
Mhm.
So it's a wonderful mix of that experience and knowledge and knowing how to get things done to somebody new that comes in and has to go through that learning curve. And sometimes it's days, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months. But that fresh set of eyes is as we're talking about, is something very valuable to come in. And have you ever been in an organization where you see something the way it's being done, they say, well, that's the way we've always done it, and that was the best explanation. Have you ever been
The way we've always done it. Yep.
yeah, we've always done it that way. Well, is there a better reason? No, that's just the way we've always. I can't really explain it. That's just the way we do business here, right? And that's usually a red flag. Not always. Sometimes that is the best way, but sometimes that's a red flag. So anyways, one of the things that I found myself doing whenever I got checked into a new job, I'd always get a big whiteboard in my office, and inevitably there'd be some process or some procedure that I didn't understand, or sometimes you can spot a flawed process a mile away immediately that no one else sees because they've just been doing it. That's the way they always did it. But a fresh set of eyes can see it. Or sometimes you're into the job for a while and in this hidden process, something comes up where you have to do something and then it doesn't make sense. Something just doesn't make sense. And so I love the flow chart process. And it's amazing. You get a whiteboard and you start, that's why I've got the flow chart up on the screen there. You can flow chart this process and you bring in the stakeholders and you walk through, because they'll have everyone's got a little different take, or it's like, no, we don't do that. We do this. Oh, I thought we did this. Okay. And before you know it, you've discovered a major flaw in the process. And then now you can address it. Now you can move on, you can fix it, and you can move on. I find that having the whiteboards, and sometimes it's painful trying to figure out the way a process works or a procedure works. And sometimes nobody really knows. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. You come across a process that nobody really knows exactly how an expense is paid at this company, or something like that. Something that's simple, but nobody really knows.
I think you and I had vastly different experiences during our active duty, because when you said, maybe you were doing some things that may not make sense. I mean, that was my day-to-day routine on board the Bellawood was, as an E3 enlisted airman, we would do a lot of things that didn't make sense, but that's just the way they were done. And you didn't ask questions. You just did it. Help me understand, Ted, when you would come into a new role as an officer, as a leader, as someone that was kind of now looked to examine the process or how things functioned inside of that organization, were people receptive kind of to that approach, to that new guy syndrome that we just spoke about, to being able to kind of view things from an outside, or did you get a lot of pushback in that, look, you're new here, Ted, this is how we do things, did the whiteboard help with that, or what was your experience?
Well, that's a great point. And that also, I think, lends itself to the culture. First of all, one of the, when I collect these different axioms or different, observe different things, good ways to do things, bad ways. I had one boss that said, you should always have a bag over your shoulder, and that's the good bag. And when you see something, you remember that, you want to keep that. Then you have another bag because you learn as much from the bad examples, sometimes more, right? And you put that in there. And I remember having one boss, this was on a submarine. He came in and we were an excellent crew. We really were doing things well. But we had a bad inspection on the very last month of the guy that was leaving, the commanding officer that was leaving. And it really was a shame. And I won't get into why, but it really was a shame because it was a superb crew. So the new guy comes in, the new CO, and he's got this perception that you guys are messed up, which couldn't be further from the truth. So this point, this pushback, this guy got tremendous pushback from us, because he thought things were messed up. But so I think it is key to recognize the experience and the excellence of the folks that have in there. Because I'm a big believer. Everybody wants to do a good job. Everybody wants to do a good job. Very rarely do you find someone that really is a slacker. I mean, every now and then, but most people want to do a good job. And a lot of times it's just they need to get the process right, or they're working hard, but they're just going in the wrong direction. You just and they just need to line up, and away they go. So I think that's the key. The other thing is there's and I'll say there's 3 times to break out the whiteboard and go through the process. And I mentioned one, we focused a lot on the fresh set of eyes. But the other one is when you don't meet a metric. And to your point, Steve, if the organization doesn't hit the metric, then you get the stakeholders in, so everyone knows why they're there, and you do what's called a so everyone knows that they're looking to resolve this and find out how they can improve. So there's really no pushback in that situation. There potentially, as I agree, there potentially is with the new guy syndrome, as you said. So you have to be careful there. But when you miss a metric, I think it's completely, everyone should be on board that, okay, we missed a metric, let's see how we can. But then the third is when something goes wrong. Forget about missing a metric, that's one thing. But if something goes wrong, and that happens, as we know, sometimes something goes horribly wrong. I remember, well, I'll use the example in the submarine force, we call it a critique. And that's where, like, let's say one time I got a nuclear part and it was mixed up with the regular parts. And I won't get into why that's such a big deal, but it's a big deal. And so we got everyone together, all the stakeholders, everyone that was in that entire supply chain, going all the way back to from the ordering to the distribution to the the receipt, the storage, everything. And we as we say, we nuked it out. And you know what? Inevitably, and the key to a successful critique, and this is very, very important. And by the way, the aviation, they call it a hot wash. In the Army, they call it an AAR, an after action review. And that is going back and looking at something when something goes wrong, and then fixing it, fixing the process, understanding the process. And we don't do that enough outside the military. The military is very good at it. But the key is, Steve, is it being non-attributional. And I was blown away the first time I went to a submarine critique, and I thought someone was going to get fired, and instead everyone is all in on figuring out what went wrong. And everyone knows nobody's getting fired. What we really need to get to is ground truth, because it's that important. We can't get this wrong again. And if it turns out it was an individual that just blew it, in some ways that's the best news possible. That means our process isn't wrong. We just had somebody that didn't follow the procedure, and that's a lot easier to fix. And trust me, that guy will never do that again, right?
Absolutely. I want to just highlight one option for those that are on the call. There is a Q&A box and down at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for Ted, please feel free to type them in there. We're monitoring that question and answer before we move into this final axiom. Ted, you want to take us into number 7?
Okay. Yes. Let's go into number 7. All right. Thinking is hard work, which is why so few people do it. And this, I'm gonna throw this back to what we started with, talking about our system 1 and system 2, and that those complex problems, those strategic problems that you need to slow down. For whatever reason, our human nature, we'd rather live in system 1 because it really is, it takes effort. So, let me ask you, Steve, I mean, when do you do your best strategic thinking? We all have our own kind of style. When do you do your best strategic thinking?
I think probably when things are at their most hectic is back to your thinking fast and slow. I mean, it's almost counterintuitive, but when things really get cranked up and are at their most fevered pitch is when I find myself most dialed in, and when I find myself most organized and most effective and most efficient. When things are slow and my mind has an opportunity to wander, right, to your point earlier about the shiny objects, right, that's when I find myself kind of going off track. It's like I said, it's almost counterintuitive for me to find more strategic thinking the faster and the busier I am. How about you?
Yeah, no, I do a lot of, I like to work out in the morning. For the last couple of years, it's been swimming, and I love to do some strategic thinking, and I just can let my mind wander, and so I don't have to count laps. I can just think about other things. But so many of us, we spend more time planning our next vacation than we do retirement, and that's one of the reasons why the American college is in business to teach people how to retire, because it's some deep thinking, right? It's long range, it's deep. So I want to take us back to Stephen Covey, and he wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talked about in that book, and when I read that, it was a game changer for me. He called it the 4 quadrants, and so if you can picture 4 quadrants here, and in the first quadrant are things that are urgent and important. Okay, then you've got the second quadrant, those things that are urgent but not important. And then you've got the third quadrant that are not urgent and not important. And then the fourth quadrant, and that's the one I want to focus on the most, and that is not urgent but important. So just to briefly go over the first two, the urgent and important, we're going to take time to take care of that because it's urgent and important. So we're pretty much, unless you're really going to find yourself in trouble, but you're going to take care of those. The urgent and not important, those are things like meetings, phone calls, text, unplanned phone calls, text, that kind of thing that you're responding to, but they're really not that important. And so you can look for ways to minimize that. The not urgent and not important, of course, that's you can make up your own list of what you do further away time, whether it's social media, TV, what have you, things that kind of you find yourself in a time trap, and you're like, wow, I just wasted an hour or 2 or 3 doing that. But it's the fourth quadrant that is worth just talking about for a second, and that's the not urgent and important. And that's where we find ourselves working on relationships. That's where we find ourselves perhaps reading good books, so important. Perhaps that's where you put your prayer and meditation. And that's where we do our strategic thinking. And so carving time out, deliberately carving time out for that, I'll call it quadrant 4, is so important. And I want to share with you, Steve, when this really hit home like a ton of bricks for me. I'm going to go back to my tour in Germany. I worked for my boss. It was a 4-star admiral. I was a Navy captain, and it was Admiral James Stavridis, 4-star. He's the supreme Allied commander. He's in charge of all the NATO forces. He's in charge of all U.S. forces in Europe and in Africa at the time. This was before we had Africa Command. This guy, 300-pound brain, strategic thinker. And one of the things I noticed when I came on the staff is I would look at his calendar, and he would have what we called white space blocked out, like nothing on his calendar. And I started asking about that, and they said, "Oh, that's where he's blocked out time for strategic thinking." Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, I haven't had time for strategic thinking in the last 10 years, except for maybe when I go swimming. But here's a guy that's got more responsibility than I could ever imagine. And he blocks out time on his calendar every week for strategic thinking. He just quiet time, and that's what he does. And at that point, I had no more excuses. If that guy could do it, I could certainly do it, and you could do it, right? I mean, we have no excuse to actually deliberately carve time out. So I'm going to give a 21-day challenge to you, Steve, to myself, and to anyone that's listening, a 21-day challenge to spend the next 3 weeks carving out time on your calendar. Just find some time. Maybe it's 30 minutes. Block it out and just say that's strategic thinking, and close the door. Do not tempt yourself and answer that email, and just block it out and just think about those long-term things. And it doesn't have to be, it can be professional, it can be personal, whatever, but do that. And I say 21 days because they say if you do something for 21 days, it makes a habit, right? And
it's the habit formulation process.
The habit formulation. So it's a 21-day challenge. Do it for 3 weeks, and then Steve, let you and I circle back and let's see if it was a game changer, because I think it absolutely can be.
Absolutely. Ted, I wanted to, and I'm going to paraphrase this question a little bit, but we had a question come in while we were visiting from Angela Maloney, who's one of our attendees here today. Angela asked, what would you say is the area you see most people struggle with this on? And I'm guessing, Angela, your question was around strategic thinking. And it may be just in leadership in general, but I think with regards to the strategic thinking and people that might struggle with that a little bit, outside of just carving out time, do you have some other suggestions on how people might be able to combat that, challenge or overcome that hurdle?
Yeah, I would say that carving out that time is perhaps the most important thing, because it's amazing what your mind can do once you start focusing on a problem or something you want, or a goal or a metric or something like that. It's amazing what can happen. But I would also challenge anyone to develop a reading habit as well. And it's amazing how you can get some great ideas. I like to say some of the best new ideas you can get from an old book. And it doesn't have to be necessarily always in the field that you're in, but to read something that kind of expands your mind a little bit and get you thinking in different ways. I think that can be a powerful way to really kind of open up your mind to different ideas.
Mhm. Agreed. Angela, I hope that answers your question. One additional bit of information that I think might be helpful if you're struggling with ways to think strategically, try not to think of it so large, right? And in my MBA on strategy, it was down to very small subsets and being able to segment those, identify those, conquer each one. And then, you begin to realize that holistically, you've come to more of a strategic reference point, right? In tackling those small pieces one at a time and being able to then view things from more of a macro level and then, not only formulate those pieces individually, but then implement them more holistically. That I think might help as well. So hopefully that answered your question. And again, folks, if you have any additional questions, there is the Q&A segment.
I think that's great insight. Taking a complex problem and trying to break it down into simpler chunks that are solvable. That's brilliant. Love it.
Perfect. Well, Ted, I can't thank you enough for sharing all 7 axioms with all of us here today. And certainly these are all principles that I think we can all apply and use in our day-to-day lives and business aspects. So, thank you. Thank you for taking the time and thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. My hope is that these little nuggets shared might be useful to you or anyone in some way. And I am pulling for your every success from here.
Yeah, for sure. And, one thing to realize, folks, Ted, myself, any of us at the college can be used as resources, but you're going to see our contact information down at the bottom of the screen here at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to reach out at any time. You can connect with us via our emails, which I think they're going to have listed, but also, look us up on social media and let's connect that way, because that's a tremendous resource in a way that we can all share ideas and thoughts going forward. So, happy to connect with any and all alumni that are in attendance today. So as we wrap up, I know we want to be cognizant of everybody's time, and we're creeping up on the top of the hour. I think we had a few more questions coming in, perhaps. Maybe it's just people congratulating us on actually getting through this, Ted. I think they had questions if two Navy knuckleheads like us could actually pull this off, but I think that we've managed it. So
just you see a question in here. What current reading recommendations do you have? That is a wide open question, and that's almost what we have to have a sidebar on. But I'll tell you, yeah, I mean, it would almost have to be a one-on-one, thinking about what kinds of things are you looking at, and what is the genres that you like. But I would challenge, whatever the list is, always every now and then pick something outside of your favorite genre to kind of stretch you a little bit. Because that's sometimes you get something, a nugget out of there that is amazing. So I don't have I would love, actually, I'd love to share with you some of my favorite books.
Give us 3. Give us the top 3, Ted.
So all right, first of all, let me share with you, I remember reading for decades about like different business leaders and what their most influential book was. And you'd see this list come out from time to time. And at the very top of the list, of course, was the Bible. And then the second one was a book called Atlas Shrugged that I've never read, and it's a very intimidating book. And so that's one that if that's the most influential book for a lot of our business leaders, it's probably one that is worth reading. I will tell you, I'm a big fan of the guy that wrote Blink and What the Dog Saw. And I'm dropping sync on his name right. Malcolm Gladwell. I like it, like some of his stuff. I love the business books. As I mentioned, Good to Great by Jim Collins and some others. And there's and of course I'm on the spot. I'm trying to remember the author's name that wrote The Black Swan, Skin in the Game. Those things are great. And then also a book by Richard Thaler called Nudge. He won the Nobel Prize for his research on behavioral economics and this notion called nudge and how people make decisions based on being influenced. So those are just a couple, but that requires a little bit more, one-on-one, I think.
I think one I want to mention from that leadership arena, and I try to find leadership books, and many times a lot of them can be repetitious and redundant in ways. But one that I've recently picked up that I think a lot of you might find interesting is from one of our former veterans in the special ops and in fact, Navy SEALs, Jason Van Camp wrote this Deliberate Discomfort. And, basically the point is, get used to or become comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And that way, to Ted's point earlier, it'll be much easier to identify perhaps when you're having a really great day, but then when you're not, it won't be such of a big deal to you. And that will then trickle down onto the people that report to you, I think, as well. So perhaps that's one in the leadership category. But as we approach 3 minutes to the top of the hour, I just want to add a friendly reminder again to all of our attendees that this webcast is eligible for 1 CE credit towards your American College Professional Recertification Program, which you can go to our student portal on the website and self-report. And that link will be shared here in a moment as well.
There's a question on here, Steve, about mentorship and who are some of the people that both of you look up to for inspiration? Why? And I'll tell you, that's a great question. And usually the mentors, at least the ones in my life, are folks that you respect and that take an interest in you, and that it's all about the relationship. And in fact, I think I have on here my bonus axiom: we're all in a people business. There you go. And even though you think a career in the military, it must be, it's still the people business. It's those relationships you build with those allies and the other countries. It's the relationships you build with your staff. It's the relationship you build up and down the chain of command. And those mentors often come and go, enter your life through they're not names that any of you all would recognize, but they're ones that, that took an interest in me, and then you try to pay it forward and take an interest in others. And Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think we're great. I want to just take this opportunity again to thank everybody for taking the time. I think in today's times with everything going on, everything seems to be a priority. And for you to take an hour out of your day to join us, we are honored, and it was a privilege being with you this afternoon. So Ted, if you can advance through those additional slides, I think we have some links to share with our alum, and our email addresses are there. If you want to write those down, again, consider us a resource, and please consider reaching out to Campaign Gratitude and helping us support the veterans community through our scholarship programs here at the college. So thank you again, Ted, and thank you everybody for joining. And I think we'll wrap it up with that.
Thanks, Steve. Absolute pleasure spending time with you.
Outstanding. Have a great afternoon. Thanks again.
That's right. Cheers.
Cheers.